Welcome to the Accomplished Brain podcast, where we share our passion, knowledge, and experience about the brain and health.
Welcome everyone back to the Accomplished Brain podcast, where we talk about brain health, chronic neurological disorders, and current health topics. In our last episode, we talked about sleep. We talked about the different stages of sleep, the chemicals or the hormones that help us get to sleep, wake us up, so on and so forth. Andrew and I both felt like it was a really great session, and there's some things that we want to dive a little deeper into. So we're actually going to do a part 2 of sleep, dive into some things a little bit deeper and kind of hone in on some other areas that sleep or lack of sleep can affect. And one thing I feel like that we kind of didn't talk about enough is how sleep can regulate our hormones and what that can do to affect our lifestyle or affect our overall health. So I think one thing I mentioned in the last episode was how sleep kind of regulates our hunger hormone, ghrelin. And what actually happens is ghrelin will actually go up, essentially making us hungrier, and leptin, which is a hormone which makes us feel full, will actually go down. So your cravings are going to go up, and you hypothetically could end up eating more. The other thing it does is it creates a metabolic inefficiency. So with 6 hours or less of sleep, if you're actually losing weight, you're not actually going to be losing fat. You're actually going to be losing muscle mass. And so what happens is your body kind of goes into that survival mode. And when you're not getting enough sleep, it says, well, we've got to find energy from somewhere, and we don't want to take away our fat resources. So actually you'll eat away at your own muscle in order to get energy. Now you will also eat away at glycogen, but when we talk about what we want to burn and what we want to lose, if we want to lose weight, we want to lose fat more than anything else. Cortisol goes up, stress hormone, and testosterone will go down as well. So when you talk about whether it's losing weight, changing body composition, so on and so forth, not getting sufficient sleep is going to put you in the opposite direction. And especially when you talk about hormones like ghrelin, obesity is arguably the biggest issue we have in this country when it comes to health. And we all know that obesity has an effect on things like our heart health. Obesity has an effect on depression, on things like ADHD. And so if we can kind of start to tailor those things alone just from sleeping, that alone can kind of help us with our lifestyles and how we eat. The other thing I think that's important is from a fertility standpoint. If we're not getting enough sufficient sleep, men actually will have fewer sperm and less quality of sperm. For women, you get a reduction in FSH, which is follicular stimulating hormone, which is a part of the reproduction pathway. So same thing if you're young in your 20s and 30s and you're trying to have kids, sleep's going to be very important to make sure that you and your partner are both fertile. And I think when it comes to health, we also have to realize some of our greatest fears, which is cancer and Alzheimer's. And I think that's kind of different for everybody in the room of kind of what you fear most. But I think it's important to understand that when we go through those sleep cycles that we spoke of, it helps regulate interstitial fluid, which lies deep in the brain, and cerebrospinal fluid. Now, both of those things act to help cleanse the brain and especially cleanse us of beta amyloid. So there's actually been tons of studies that find that the less sleep that you're getting, if you're getting 5 hours or less, you have a higher number of beta amyloid. And that was found specifically at the Department of Neurology at the University of Washington. For me personally, Alzheimer's is one of my greatest fears, and I think doing something as simple as sleeping to avoid getting those beta amyloid plaques is a really easy thing to do. And also, when we talk about things like cancer. So we all know that sleeping helps us, helps our immune system get stronger. It helps us develop more T cells, so on and so forth. But I think one really interesting thing is that an interesting fact I found is that after one bad night of sleep, our natural killer cells go down by 70%. So natural killer cells are kind of like the Navy SEALs of our immune system. They're very precise, they're very targeted, they're very strong. And basically what they do is if they find whether it's a toxin or a bad molecule, they'll inject it, they'll attack it to try to kill it. So if we think of something like a cancer or some sort of a disease coming into our system, um, if you're 70% down in those natural killer cells after one bad night of sleep, you can let a lot of things pass through our system go unnoticed. And just as a side note, I do think it's important to know we all have cancer living inside of us, but if you have a healthy immune system, it'll never metastasize and become anything. But if you continue to do something like get bad night of sleep, environmental toxins, so on and so forth, that cancer will build up more and more, and your immune system will get to a point where it can't fight it anymore. But lastly, in a time of COVID, and we're all talking about the vaccine, I also think it's important to know that when you're lacking sleep, you also produce less antibodies. There's actually a study done where they took a large group of people and gave them 5 nights of sleep with 5 hours or less of sleep, and they found that they were producing 50% less of the antibodies that they normally would produce. So when you think of, hey, I'm going to go get my flu shot this year, or I'm going to go get the COVID vaccine, you're actually going to make that vaccine way less effective than it's designed to be, because your body doesn't have the antibodies to really fight it and manipulate it and get used to it. So I think that those are all things that are important when it comes to understanding the overall health of why sleep is so important. It's not just because of our energy levels. It actually has a huge effect on how our immune system functions, how our hormones replenish themselves, and it can prevent long-term issues such as Alzheimer's. So I think at the end of the day, it's a really simple thing to fix. And Andrew is going to go into now of talking at a molecular level of things that we can do to enhance our quality of sleep and to help us get to sleep.
Jeff, well, that was very well said. Excellent, very well done. Really good with putting it all together and relating the sleep to hormones, to fertility, to the immune system. You know, and then overall, like with some of the chronic neurological diseases like Alzheimer's. So I
Mhm.
thought that was extremely well said and just really well put together. So
Thanks.
yeah, as to talk about like what we talked about last week, and just I want to review a little bit, and then I want to come into a little bit deeper of the some things that we could do that could help. Obviously, that's why we're here with the Accomplished Brain podcast and talking about brain health. Is we want to give. We want to help as many people as we can. I mean, that's the mission, right? So we talked about that the first thing that happens is with sleep. Well, there's a couple things. One is that with sleep, there's a neurotransmitter called GABA. Okay, GABA is a transmitter that calms us down, a neurochemical that calms us down. Okay, and then GABA gets activated in the ventral lateral preoptic area of the hypothalamus. So you have the brain, right? And then you have the sublayer of the brain, and the next the next layer, and that sublayer sits between the brain, the cortex itself, and the brainstem. You have a sublayer, and that is made up of like the hypothalamus, the thalamus, the basal ganglia, all that area of it is called the sublayer. So in the sublayer, there's a hypothalamus, and it's a lot of, and that's where our wake up and sleep cycle. So there's an area in the hypothalamus called your ventral lateral preoptic area of the brain, and GABA is activated. So that area of the brain gets activated, GABA gets activated. Then GABA inhibits two hormones, right? So one is orexin. So orexin sits in the posterior part of the hypothalamus and the lateral part of the hypothalamus. So GABA grabs onto orexin and calms it down, right? Because what orexin is, it's a hormone to arouse us. So orexin's important, especially when we want to wake up, but when we want to go to sleep, you want it inhibited, right? And then also orexin, GABA also inhibits in the posterior hypothalamus. Uh, it inhibits histamine. So histamine a lot of times is made from allergies. So be conscious of your food reactions, because if you have a food immune reaction, that immune reaction could increase histamine levels, or if you're eating foods that could. So one of the things to look at is, do I have any food sensitivities? And we could go in. We'll probably go into like a neurological immune topic. Probably, I think a good topic would talk about food and immune and on autoimmunity and how we can approach autoimmune conditions. So I think that's a whole nother topic. So again, it's great that we have these podcasts, because during the podcast, it's like, boom, like that moment comes, we think about other things,
Right.
that we could other
Right.
other topics. So then what happens is that's one angle, right? The other so then the other thing that happens is, it's many things. So that's one equation, right? So GABA in the hypothalamus, sublayer of the brain, so brain, sublayer, brainstem. So in that sublayer of the brain, the hypothalamus, ventral lateral preoptic area, GABA gets activated. It inhibits orexin, which is a hormone that's in your posterior, the back part, the posterior, the part of your hypothalamus, and the lateral part of the hypothalamus, right? So the orexin is a hormone that arouses us, and GABA inhibits that, shuts that down. And then GABA also inhibits histamine. Histamine can be made with some allergic reaction, right? So just conscious of food sensitivities. Then the next thing that happens is, well, not next, but another thing that goes on is cortisol needs to be low. So cortisol has a rhythm, right? Cortisol is a stress hormone. It's a natural stress hormone. And cortisol needs to be high in the morning, and it progressively gets lower as the day goes on, and at lowest point in the morning. That's the established normal rhythm. The hippocampus sits in your hippocampal formation, and your hippocampal formation is and your hippocampus sits there in that part of the hippocampus. So the hippocampus sits in the hippocampal formation, and the hippocampus is an area where you have your memory neurons, right? Where your memories are made. Hippocampus is very important for memory. So what happens is that the hippocampus also has a role and a play in modulating that cortisol rhythm. So again, when you see cortisol rhythm off, so you just think about this whole like, and we talk about functional, right? And it's interesting that Jeff and I have been in the field for a long time, and everything we talk about is functional. And what functional means is that one area connects to another, which connects to another, which connects to another. So it's like a domino effect. So when you're actually looking, you have to when you work with clients, whether it's a musculoskeletal injury, whether it's a brain injury, whether it's a nutritional biologic issue that's going on. And a lot of times, the more depth your therapist is, so your therapist knows about brain, your therapist, I say this, your therapist comes in with good consciousness and energy, he's going to help you. Your therapist knows about brain, your therapist knows about uh, nutrition, and your therapist knows about exercise, and they're good at those things and how to put everything together functionally, and you do the work and listen and give your therapist or trainer good feedback, you're going to have a good chance to get better and improve. I mean, because all those systems look at things in a functional way. One area is connected to another area, right? So when you look at sleep, when you have that lack of sleep, that's going to affect hormones. That's going to affect memory. That's going to affect immune system. That's going to affect cortisol, which is part of your hormones. That's going to affect heart. So it's like that cortisol is going to affect blood sugar, which is going to affect, cholesterol. So it's like getting that sleep under control is not just, hey, do I fall asleep, but I'm affecting many different systems. Okay. So when we come in, we said that cortisol needs to be high. It's high in the morning, gets lower every time, gets lowest at night. When cortisol is low, melatonin is going to be high. Okay. So melatonin, you need high to dull the pineal gland to allow yourself to further the fall asleep. Okay. So melatonin, a precursor to make melatonin is serotonin. So again, think about this: serotonin levels high, melatonin high, and then cortisol is low. So you got to look at that. And melatonin being high is looking directly on how serotonin. So serotonin and cortisol play like a huge role. Then we talked about like the sleep, all your neural. So again, in the beginning to fall asleep, you need the serotonin, right, to get activated to make a precursor to make melatonin. Then it dulls the pineal gland. Then eventually, all your transmitters, once you start to fall asleep, the 1 to 3 range of sleep, all your neurotransmitters start to uh, relax. Serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, right? So then once that happens, and you're going from that sleep, so you fall asleep, you get to stay asleep, and then you're going into sleep to the last stages of sleep, which is your REM sleep. And again, as Jeff pointed out, you're going back and forth from different stages all night long. So you just don't stay in one stage. So the REM sleep, there are two things that are very important with REM sleep is that acetylcholine is actually being activated, right? And then the uh, next thing is that your REM, and REM stands for rapid eye movement. So your frontal lobe and your brainstem, and you're actually doing eye movements called saccades. Now, the question is, how can you do eye movements? This is very important. And I wanted to this keynote that I wanted people to, how can you do eye movements with your eyes closed? Because a saccade basically lasts, the saccade lasts 100 milliseconds. So if I go from, and a saccade is looking at still targets, it's fast eye movements. And these saccades, that they last 100 milliseconds, it's the latency of the actual visual system. So let me explain. So that's why you could do saccades in the dark, and that's why you're doing the saccade with your eyes closed, sleeping. So a saccade, a latency means the delay on when the saccade when something would start. Latency. So latency means the delay on when something would start. So when you're actually seeing the target, there's a delay from when actually the target is there to the time that your visual system starts to actually see the target is 100 milliseconds. So there's a latency. So the saccade only lasts 100 milliseconds. So it's time the saccade finishes, the actual onset of the visual system comes on, because the visual system, there's latency, meaning that the time that the visual system starts to kick in is at 100 milliseconds. The saccade only lasts that long. That's why you could do saccades in the dark, or you could do saccades in the light. So when the eyelids are closed, you're rapidly firing the eyes, and that's why it's called REM. It's called rapid eye movement, which is another terminology. Is called they call it saccade, but I say saccade. So if I'm saying it wrong, I'm saying it wrong, but that's how I say it. But it's SACCADE. So maybe a neurologist, if I am saying if it's saccade, I'm sorry, but I'd say it's saccade, but it's okay. But Yeah, and that saccade is very heavily looking at your frontal lobe and looking at your brainstem. Depending on, most of the time, you're probably going to be doing horizontal saccades, so it's going to be looking at the pons. If you were doing vertical saccades, it look at your upper brainstem called your mesencephalon. Okay, so with that, so we kind of went into like a review of how you fall asleep. Now, important to stay asleep is to make sure that blood sugar is maintained. So I want to talk about like some of the things we could do, like to mean. So let's talk about, let's break down some of the mechanisms that we could do. And as Jeff and I talked about, we're very mechanism based therapies, right? Or mechanism based podcast, or mechanism based when we talk. We really like to break down. And why do we do that? Is because when you have the foundation of the mechanism, you know how things work. So once you when they're not working the way you want, you have a foundation of where the mechanism is broken down, and you could get really creative to figure out how to fix that mechanism. So let's start with the cortisol. Well, let's start with like the cortisol rhythm. So the first things I would say is, if you're having problems sleep, one, I would look at your stress level, right? So, how is your stress level? The second thing that I would look at is if you're going to do a cortisol test, and I'll share this just from my experience. This is personally, now this doesn't, it's not the end all be all. So I want you to share, this is just personal experience. One of the best ways that I have found to look at cortisol is to look at it from a saliva base. Now, there's doctors out there that they do it from a blood work. I think the best way to do it is saliva based. And when you look at cortisol, and the reason why I like saliva based is because when you're looking from these panels, now there are different companies. One company that I've used over the years, they're out in the state of Washington. It's called Diagnose Tex, Diagnos Tex, Tech. So Diagnose Tech is a really good company, and they provide a lot of really nice testing, especially saliva for hormones. Now, with saliva, it's really good because you could do the saliva test at 4 different times. So you could do it like from 6 to 8, from like 11 to 1, 4 to 5, and like 10 to 12 at night. So you can kind of get that whole rhythm, and you could get that whole rhythm. That's really important. Now, what happens if your cortisol is out? So and that could be a whole different panel. A whole different podcast. But for the most part, if it is out, you want to know, is the cortisol, when it's out, is it high or low? That's very important, right? What your overall, so when you do these panels, they'll look at what your cortisol was from in those 4 different times that you take it. So each time they'll give you an overall cortisol output. Reason why that's important is it looks at the whole gland itself, how the gland is, and the gland might need support, which we will probably go into. But for the most part, there are things that you could do. So again, one of the supplements that's really good is GABA. So again, we need GABA for, so and it depends on where the gland, if the gland is completely off and it's fatigued, you want to probably give some norepinephrine as a supplement. Okay, if the gland is firing really high, you probably want to give some GABA. But I think Jeff and I should go through a whole really podcast specifically on stress and cortisol itself and strategies. But for the most part, one of the things you want to do now, things that I think that will help the stress. So remember, stress could be emotional, stress could be physical, so you're working out too much, or stress could be physiological. And usually a physiological stress is problems maintaining blood sugar, problems with food sensitivities, eating maybe too many carbs, lack of exercise. Those are usually your physiological things that will cause a stress response. So, an important factor, and again, these are other podcasts that I'm thinking down the road that we should probably do, is a whole podcast on food sensitivities. Okay. Because food sensitivities are going to affect your immune system. Food sensitivities are obviously going to affect inflammation. Food sensitivities are going to affect your cortisol, which again is going to affect your blood sugar, and so on and so forth. So again, looking at food sensitivity, there's a company that I like. It's a blood test, and it's called from Cyrex Labs. It's their Array 10, Cyrex, Cyrex, one of the top lab companies, and they have a great blood test that looks at their food reaction, the immune system's reaction to certain foods. So it's called raw versus cooked, food glues. I mean, they have a lot of really, they're looking at lectins, they're looking at gluten. I mean, really, it's a very, very thorough panel and very helpful. So again, and we talked about food sensitivities, one for cortisol, but then food sensitivities, and especially if you eat them, could increase your histamine levels, which can affect your ability for the GABA to inhibit, because your histamine levels could be too high, and that could hinder you from, falling asleep. So that could be like an issue. Okay, so cortisol. Some of the things also is making sure like the gut is and making sure your prebiotics is in your system. So prebiotics, some of the things that I think are really helpful, and some of the things I do is resistant starches. So what happens is there is starch from raw bananas and raw potatoes, and you say to myself, what do you mean? Bananas and potatoes have are really are starchy type foods, but when they're raw, when it's in its raw form, and you make a supplement in its raw form, or if you take those potatoes or rice and you make it cold for about 12 hours, it turns into a resistant starch. What happens is that 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 nutrient, that starch, bypasses the small intestine and goes right into the colon and colonizes the colon, where it's like a prebiotic, and it feeds the good bacteria in your colon. So bypasses the small intestine. So it acts as like a really good fiber. And the research on resistant starch, what happens is you make a byproduct, a small chain fatty acid called butyrate. And butyrate, the research around butyrate is unparalleled for lowering inflammation, for improving immune system, improving blood sugar, decreasing cholesterol, overall, reducing inflammation, and getting the gut, getting the gut, the bacteria of the gut. I mean, getting the intestinal wall, the wall of the gut, to be clear, clean, and fixed, and supports the gut the gut wall, which is huge, because again, when the gut wall and you have a leaky gut, you're more prone to having immune reactions, which again can increase histamine. Again, it can increase your inflammation. Again, which could which again could cause all sorts of reactions, immune reactions, again, and all that could affect your sleep. Okay, so I think some of the things with cortisol is, one, doing a cortisol test, a 4-point cortisol test 4 times during the day, saliva. You could do many different company that I use and I've used in the past, saliva test, diagnose tests from the state of Washington. Okay, if you have a cortisol problem, you want to look at, is it out of range at a certain time, if it's high, you might want to give some kind of GABA in that time period. If it's low, you might want to give some kind of norepinephrine. And then there's type of glandular, there's type of nutrients that could support the gland itself. And we'll have a separate podcast and we'll go over that. Okay, so there's your cortisol. Now we want to talk about serotonin, because remember, cortisol has, so let's break down the mechanism. So we worked on cortisol. Now we have to work on the serotonin, the melatonin. So we know we know you could take a supplement that can increase your melatonin levels, right? A melatonin supplement, right? A lot of people have done that. We know that you could take 5-HTP, right? Because that increases serotonin. 5-H. So let's say, how do you make serotonin? It's really, really, really important, right? So I'm going to go into a couple of those ways on how that you make serotonin. So one, tryptophan. So tryptophan turns into 5-HTP, which turns into serotonin. An important factor. This is important. Now, here's the thing. Here's some of the questions that can show that you have lack of serotonin. Do you have loss of pleasure in hobbies? Do you feel overwhelmed with ideas to manage? Do you have feelings of inner rage? Do you have feelings of inner paranoia? Do you have feelings of depression? Do you feel like you're not enjoying life? Do you feel lack of artistic appreciation? All those questions, if any of those, there could be a potential that you might not have serotonin. Now, enough serotonin. Now, serotonin, tryptophan turns into 5-HT, which turns into serotonin. So first, let's break down tryptophan. So foods that have a lot of tryptophan: chicken breasts, spinach, okay, lamb, grass-fed beef, grass-fed liver, wild salmon, shrimp, halibut, all of those scallops, wild scallops, all of those make tryptophan. So you could get tryptophan in food. Then you need tryptophan turns into 5-HTP, which turns into serotonin. In order to get that equation from tryptophan, 5-HTP to serotonin, that three-man basketball team, right? Because tryptophan, 5-HTP, ultimately we make serotonin. We need good blood sugar. So again, what happened to our talk that we had with sleep? We said to stay asleep. We said what? Manage blood sugar. So here's where that blood sugar comes. So we said proteins and fats help stabilize blood sugar. Proteins and fats. So proteins. So having like a protein powder. You can have pea if you're allergic to pea. You can have a bone broth, a grass-fed. If you could tolerate whey, you could have a grass-fed whey. So again, protein, good fat, olive oil, coconut oil, almond butter, avocados, avocado oil. These are all good fats. Proteins and fats help stabilize blood sugar. So you can have if you don't react to the almonds, right? You can have almond butter and like celery or something that has protein and fat in it, right? So again, stabilizing the blood sugar. Then you want to look at iron, right? So you have tryptophan. We said we could get that in food, right? We said tryptophan, you have chicken, scallops, spinach, turkey, grass-fed lamb, grass-fed beef, grass-fed liver, wild salmon, shrimp, all those wild scallops. You'll get the tryptophan in food. But now we need to turn the tryptophan into 5-HTP, which turns into serotonin. So we need good blood sugar. So we talked about proteins and fats. We talked about now iron. So you could get iron in your grass-fed meat. You could get iron in spinach. Okay. But here's a kicker. Some people have autoimmunity, right? And they have a condition called pernicious anemia. So basically they have a problem with the intrinsic factor in their gut to be able to absorb the iron. So in people like that, we need to have them on an autoimmune paleo diet. We need to have them really focus on food sensitivities, immune system, right? Immune system function. vagal nerve stimulation, right? Brain stimulation, right? For the vagal nerve. So vagal nerve stimulation itself on the brain. Okay. So in that way, you want to make sure your iron levels, you want to make sure you're not anemic. So doing a blood test and looking to see if there's any anemia. B vitamins, doing a blood test to make sure that you have adequate B vitamins. Where are you going to get your B vitamins? A lot of your and then magnesium. So again, tryptophan you get in food turns into 5-HTP, which turns into serotonin. You need good blood sugar for tryptophan. So that equation, tryptophan, 5-HTP, serotonin, blood sugar, fats and proteins, iron. Make sure you don't have pernicious anemia. You're getting your iron from uh, green veg, some of your spinach, your grass-fed meats, B vitamins and magnesium, your green leafy vegetables. Okay, so if you have that whole equation working together, you can make serotonin. Now, how else can we make serotonin and improve serotonin levels? This is a great, this is where our vagal nerve stimulation comes in. So here, if we look at this is our ear clip. We put the ear clip on the left ear. We have a pad. Let me show you my pad here. And this is the TENS unit that we use. We get a TENS 7000 unit from Amazon. I think TENS Pro Net. I think the TENS unit's like $30. The ear clip tenspro.net is about $8 or $10 with shipping. It's about $20, and you get 2 of them. If you order 1, 2 of them come in. And then here's your pad. So here's your pad. Okay, here's your pad. Okay, you put your pad on the left side like this, on the pericardium, all on the left side. So the ear clip goes in the tragus of the left ear. You have red because you don't want to have anything go to the heart, and you want to put it on the tragus of the ear. On the left ear is the branch of the auricular branch of the vagus nerve. Now, why that's important, why does vagal nerve stimulation? Because just put it in Google and you'll see research on the anti-inflammatory reflex. It helps the cholinergic pathways. So choline is precursor to make acetylcholine. So you're improving those acetylcholine pathways, as well as you're helping improve the ability to make more serotonin. Okay, so again, that's why vagal nerve stimulation is so important. Vagal nerve stimulation has helped people with depression because some people lack the serotonin with sleep. Okay, so and obviously with the immune system, with lowering, because the vagal nerve stimulation will lower inflammation, especially in your gut. Okay, so again, we talked about foods, we talked about nutrients that can make the serotonin, that can make the melatonin. You can always take melatonin, you can always take 5-HTP, but if you want to figure out the mechanism on how to do it naturally, this is kind of how we roll and how we do things. Now, let's gonna break down some of the other things that you could do. So with GABA, some of the things, you could have a GABA supplement. Okay, so that could definitely work. You could do, so we could take some GABA supplements, and then foods. I just want to kind of go in here a little bit, and I want to share a little bit foods to help support GABA. So here, foods. So some of the things are fish, beans, lentils. So those are some of the foods that can help more of, again, yogurts, prebiotics can help support, because a lot of your neurotransmitters are actually made in your gut. So the better your digestive and gut function, again, vagal nerve stimulation, prebiotics, the better your gut is functioning, the better you'll make those neurotransmitters. Okay. So another thing that will help the GABA is doing vestibular exercises. So as we talked about here, we're just going to share my screen for a sec, and we have a revolutionary software. Okay. So we have a revolutionary brain-based software okay, that we have specific. So let me we'll share this.
Andrew, while you're bringing that up, just to make a quick side note, when you talk about the serotonin and the cortisol, those things are going to set up what is our circadian rhythm, right? Of when we want to go to sleep, when we want to wake up. And I just think it's important to note when you talk about that from a molecular standpoint, it kind of turns on the idea of there's a lot of people out there that don't get enough sleep during the week and say, well, I'll make it up on the weekend. Well, you'll never actually make it up because you're setting yourself up for failure because while, hey, you might be able to sleep in 4 more hours on a Saturday or Sunday, that cortisol rhythm, that serotonin rhythm, those things aren't going to change over 2 days and then be able to go back during your 5-day work week. So I think it's important for people to understand that you can't actually make that stuff up, and that you're basically going to be throwing off your own circadian rhythm twice a week if you continue to do those things.
Yeah, and he's 100% right. It's a habit that needs to be like a 7-day a week habit. And I wanted to talk about so the GABA. So the GABA, we could do some vestibular exercises, which we have a software, the Accomplished Brain software, which was only available working with if you're a practitioner. This is something that we're finishing our automated payment systems and all that. But I'd say in the next probably 2+ months, we should be available to start taking practitioners on so they could utilize their software for them and their patient and their clients. We have 6 brain programs. We have a breathing program, virtual reality, vestibular, which is this program. We have a virtual reality eye movement with 6 parts. We have a visual motor imagery for dyslexia, chronic pain, phantom pain. We have a sound program for balance and a 2DI program with 6 parts. So, and we're going to be adding this year, we're going to be doing virtual reality mirror therapy. We're going to be adding augmented reality probably towards sometime next year this time next year, augmented reality reaction time training for sports performance and for Parkinson's and strokes. And then we're going to also be adding this year the ability to measure people's balance automatically, and eye movements, heart rate, pulse, temperature, and heart rate variability. So we're really, we have a great software and we're only going to add to it. So in this case, we could have different backgrounds to drive dopamine. So we can improve GABA as well as dopamine. And this is your inner ear. So this is a balance center, but it's also projects to the brainstem and to the brain. So we use it for obviously we use a lot for balance, for a posture, but we also use it for general brain stimulation. So we have different motions that we can move people in, different degrees, different speed, different reps. So we have a lot of different cool things, very specific. We use this for concussion, traumatic brain injury, strokes, Parkinson's, balance disorders, kids with ADHD, movement disorders, people with autoimmunity, and people who have problems sleeping. So we use it for many different. And it's a very simple. We use a headset that's like a $30. The prices do change. So if I say it's $30, it's probably that's what Amazon is charging today. Because
Right.
we've had times where we have driven the demand up for these headsets that sometimes they were started at 30 and then they went up to 60 because the demand, and obviously that when the demand goes up, the price usually goes up as well. So
Sure.
So we could do vestibular work. We could do vagal nerve stimulation. The other thing I want to share with you that's very powerful is that could calm the nervous system down and improve the parasympathetic function is, so a couple things. One is foods we talked about that at night that could drive, besides the protein and fats, getting more magnesium in your system. So, and getting more potassium. So magnesium basically stimulates so you have 2 parts of your autonomic nervous system. right? Autonomic is heart rate, pulse, temperature, oxygen. These are all digestion. These are all autonomic. So you have your autonomic, you have ones that really rev you up and drive, and another, which is your sympathetic part of your autonomic system, and then your parasympathetic, which basically calms you down. So your parasympathetic is very important for sleep, for rest and digest. So vagal nerve stimulation is really good. But for foods, like getting magnesium and potassium. So magnesium stimulates, activates the parasympathetic. So magnesium inhibits the sympathetic system, and potassium activates the parasympathetic. So they go kind of hand in hand together, right? So magnesium inhibits the sympathetic system. So the sympathetic magnesium says up, calming you down. And then potassium stimulates the parasympathetic system. So magnesium is good because it takes that sympathetic and drives it down, and then the magnesium and the potassium drives the parasympathetic, so you further drive yourself down. So green leafy vegetables. So at night, sometimes things are a good meal, and I do this at night, is chicken breast. So think about this, right? Chicken breast, you got your protein. Chicken breast, you got your tryptophan, right? Then you go in and you say, I want to get some additional fats, a little avocado, right? Then I want to go in and I either want to get like an arugula salad over a little over with a little olive oil. So I got a little further. I got the omega-9 fats coming from the olive oil. I got the omega-9 fat coming from the avocado, right? And then you got the protein, you got the tryptophan, you've got the fats, right? And you also you could always throw in a little spinach to get the iron in there, right? So you throw a little arugula and some spinach, and then the spinach and the arugula, you're going to get your magnesium and your B vitamins. You're going to get your magnesium and you're going to get your potassium. So think about that. That meal at night, grilled chicken breast, right? And I do this a lot. My wife, I see my wife, because she's a great cook. She's a speech pathologist, Luce. What a wonderful lady she is. And Jeff has a great wife, Kristen. I always have to mention her because she's a very special lady as well. We both very lucky
Thank
guys
you.
to have
Thank
special.
you. Yes,
special
we are.
wives. But you have grilled chicken, right, which gets your protein. So we said protein and fats, avocado. You get your olive oil, protein, fat, stabilize the blood sugar. In addition, the chicken breast has tryptophan. So now you get your tryptophan, your equation to start your serotonin. Then you come in and you say, okay, I'm going to have my tryptophan, and I'm going to throw in a little arugula and spinach. And now I've got my iron, and then I've got my B vitamin and magnesium, right? And then I can make my serotonin. Then I could get off my dinner. I could come in and help to further digest my food. Is I could do a little vagal nerve stimulation, right? So I fire the cholinergic pathways. I fire the anti-inflammatory reflex. I get my digestive system, suppress my inflammation, right? And then from there, and I can further modulate and increase my serotonin levels. Then I could come in and I could do some if you work with us, Jeff or I, or eventually more practitioners are interested in working with their clients. You have the Accomplished Brain software. It could do Activator, which is our virtual reality vestibular. That you could follow that up with doing some breathing. So we have a program called Regulator that could further modulate, and then you could top it off with doing some meditation. And some of the things I use, I listen. Everyone has their own conscious energy. There's a lot of really good ones out there. I use Wayne Dyer, and I like him. He passed away about 5 years ago. Very special guy. Never met him, but I listened to a lot of his work. And I listen to, before I go to sleep, some sounds and meditation from Wayne Dyer, and that helps a lot. So all those things together, I love it, because when I got back on today, it's like Jeff just is like the guy in the first 3 or 4 or 5 innings, comes in to the podcast and just really ignites us, gets us excited, gives us some really good content. And I get fired up listening to Jeff, because he's smart. He works hard. He's really good at what he does, and he really adds a lot of value. And I take some notes because I love some of the things that he has put in this podcast. And then and that gets me fired up. And then I get on a roll, and like I can't stop, because all Jeff and I want to do is we want to help people, right? That's a conscious energy coming from a great place. We just want to help people. We're in a good place. We work on our own consciousness, and we just want to help and give really good ideas. Obviously, we don't on these podcasts, we just share what we do. And if you have questions, you could contact theaccomplishedbrain.com. Jeff has a company, rep, that's in Westchester. I'm in New Jersey, but I do a lot of online. We both do online. And contact us. We'd love to hear from you. If you're a practitioner, we'd love to answer any questions so you can help more of your patients. Because the impact really for us is the more people we can help. So the more clients, but ultimately the more practitioners that we can help, that could help more clients, but also people that work with us, the clients, and then practitioners, we could answer questions, and then they can help more clients. And together we can help more people improve their health.
For sure.
And it's amazing when we do these podcasts, every day, there are new ideas about autoimmunity. There are new ideas about, deeper level of cortisol, but I love it. I think this was another really, really good podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think you knocked that out of the park, and all that stuff, and how to stimulate those different pathways is key for us. And I think in general too, you just talk about habits, right? For me, I take a magnesium and a fish oil supplement with my last meal before I go to sleep. And I think in general too, like meditation's fantastic to do. As you know, Andrew, I do Aldoa before I go to sleep, which is good for me in managing my back, but also too, it's an isometric contraction, so it stimulates 1B gated afferentation.
There you go.
Really helps calm myself before I go to sleep.
There you go. So I want to reiterate. Yeah. So Jeff is, I've been exposed, and Jeff probably even deeper than I have. Aldoa, it was started by a French osteopath to elongate the segment of the spine. So a great osteopath, Guy Voyer from Marseille, France. We both have learned from him tremendous knowledge in osteopath and with physiology and biomechanics. And so he created this. But what was interesting was when Jeff and I got together with the neuroscience stuff, we realized that what you're doing is the mechanoreceptors in the spine are 1B receptors. So remember, we talked about the body works with receptors. That's how the nervous system communicates and does different actions. So different things, different parts of function have different receptors. That's how the nervous system has to work, right? It's electrical system, right? So there's receptors in the spine, in the joint, called joint mechanoreceptors. When those get stimulated, they activate a 1B gated afferentation. Gated means to inhibit. So it calms this. So not only when you do these spine stretches that Jeff is, if you need a lot of, or want to learn more about that, Jeff is a great guy to contact. Jeff Rose at Reps is a great guy to contact. Jeff here, who's doing the podcast with me. And he knows a lot and can help a lot of people. And what they'll do, not only will they help to improve the functionality of the spine and the fluidity of the spine, especially, and if you have any disc issues, tremendous amount of work.
Yeah,
and
best.
it could get very isolated with the very segment. There's a stretch for every segment, but it'll also fire 1B gated afferentation, and it'll calm the system down. So doing it at night it'll just be a home run. So, or after your workout, so just a home run.
Definitely. Well, great. I think that was great, Andrew. Thanks so much for everyone for joining us today, and we're looking forward to next time.
Great. Yep. We're looking forward to next time. Thank you, everybody.